Just sit there and record the weather. Don't touch the flight equipment." The young sergeant waved her away dismissively in front of the drone students practicing on the field. She said nothing, just looked up at the wind patterns. Then a sudden downdraft hit. The drone spun wildly, heading straight for the cliff face. She stepped forward, grabbed the backup controller, one 180-degree spin, then a wind pocket maneuver. The drone landed safely. The flight instructor stood frozen. "Who taught you that technique?" Her name was Lynn, 34 years old. Small frame, short-cropped hair, wearing faded mechanics coveralls and worn boots. Always calm eyes that seemed to see everything. She lived and worked at Bravo 7 Base, inspecting helicopter components, specifically AH-64 Apache attack helicopters. Every morning, Lynn dusted off the model helicopter in the command center. A small gesture nobody noticed. Colleagues often teased her. "Still dreaming about your pilot days?" Young officers would laugh. "She probably thinks she's the next Red Talon." Lynn never reacted. She quietly did her job, checking for microscopic cracks in auxiliary rotor systems that most technicians overlooked. One day she detected abnormal vibrations in Apache No. 109's rear stabilizer. Her report was dismissed. Not critical. Lynn just nodded, took notes, then spent her evening alone, sketching vibration trajectory diagrams with slightly trembling hands. She never argued, never mentioned that she'd served in the Eastern Highlands campaign 6 years ago. All they knew was that she was someone who was demoted after a failed mission. But nobody knew the truth. She'd voluntarily requested removal from flight duty after saving 3 people in a supply depot explosion, while sustaining a deep scar on her shoulder. What they saw was a quiet technician who kept to herself. What they didn't see was someone carrying the weight of lives saved, and the one life she couldn't save. During lunch breaks, she'd sit alone, studying wind patterns on weather maps. Old habits from when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. When new pilots complained about difficult landing conditions, she'd quietly adjust their approach vectors on the duty board. They never knew who helped them. Her supervisor once caught her hand-drawing flight paths. "Why waste time with manual calculations when we have computers?" "Computers fail," she replied simply. "Muscle memory doesn't." But they didn't listen. To them, she was just another mechanic who'd washed out of pilot training. They had no idea they were looking at a legend. The kind of pilot other pilots whispered about. The kind who could fly a damaged Apache home on instinct alone. But legends, sometimes, choose to hide in plain sight. Comment "so unfair" if you've seen experienced people get overlooked. Rumors circulated around the base. Lynn had been an Apache pilot who refused a medal after a mission failure. Lieutenant Kai, a new officer, noticed her hand-drawing flight maps with wind timing notations for different flight zones. "Were you really a pilot?" he asked. She didn't answer, just folded the paper and smiled. "Why would you need that when you have radar?" Once, the sensor system gave false readings on auxiliary rotor direction. Lynn suggested a manual inspection. She was ignored. 3 days later, that Apache was forced to make an emergency landing due to mid-flight axis deviation. Lieutenant Kai started watching her more carefully. One night, he saw her training new recruits, using hand-drawn maps. If you lose electronic warfare capabilities and your HUD goes dark, listen to the rotor sound before you trust the instruments. But the next day, an emergency drill was accidentally triggered. The identification system flagged her as unidentified personnel of unknown clearance level. 3 Apaches scrambled immediately. Guards surrounded the fuel depot area where Lynn was inspecting fuel lines. She didn't resist. She calmly walked into the center of the courtyard and raised her hand in a signal. An old hand signal. One only taught in a specialized class called Wind Spiral 3. One Apache banked and tilted. The entire command center froze. An older colonel ran out, looked at her, and whispered, "That's her call sign. Sable 7. Nobody else knows that signal." The pieces started falling into place. The quiet technician wasn't just any former pilot. She was the pilot, the one from the stories, the one who'd flown impossible missions in impossible conditions. But why was she here, fixing helicopters instead of flying them? Lieutenant Kai pulled her personnel file. Most of it was classified, but what he could see made his blood run cold. Multiple commendations, classified operations, and then a gap. 6 years of nothing but maintenance assignments. What had happened during that missing time? That evening, he approached her. "Ma'am, I looked up the Sable 7 call sign. The records are mostly classified, but you want to know why I'm not flying anymore?" "Yes, ma'am." Lynn was quiet for a long moment. Then she showed him a photograph. 4 soldiers standing next to an Apache. She pointed to each face. "This one survived. This one survived. This one survived." She paused at the 4th face. "This one didn't. What happened?" "I could only carry 3 people out. Had to choose who to leave behind." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I chose to save the 3 who were conscious. The 4th was unconscious but breathing. You couldn't have known. When I went back for him, the depot exploded. I could have saved him if I'd made a different choice." Lieutenant Kai finally understood. This wasn't about a failed mission. This was about a hero who'd saved everyone she could, and couldn't forgive herself for the ones she couldn't save. Comment, "I was wrong," if you've ever completely misjudged someone. Lynn was escorted to the command center. No handcuffs, no interrogation lights. On the table, a classified file with red markings. Real name, Lieutenant Nguyen Thao Lin. Call sign, Red Talon. Primary Apache pilot for the Eastern Highlands Campaign 2018. Missing in action for 48 hours in enemy territory. Returned with 3 wounded soldiers and an aircraft at 20% flight capability. She'd refused the Medal of Honor and requested transfer to logistics because she couldn't save the 4th person. Command had quietly honored her request, transferring her to maintenance duties. Every year, she sent handwritten letters to the families of the soldiers she'd saved, but she never revealed she was the pilot who brought them home. The current colonel was one of those soldiers. His voice broke. "I owe you my life and 6 years of silence." He turned to the other pilots. "The person you call a technician is the pilot who kept an Apache airborne on 1 damaged rotor using manual tail controls only." Lynn kept her head down. "I don't want medals. I just want to know if current Apaches have fixed the vibration issue when entering wind vortexes. But we need you to help us fix it." A young officer saluted her. Another asked permission to relearn her manual flight techniques. She stepped outside. The wind was gentle. An Apache flew overhead, tilting its wings in salute. But the most emotional moment came when Lieutenant Kai approached her with a folder. "Ma'am, I found something else in the classified reports." He showed her a document dated 6 months after her last mission. A recommendation for the Medal of Honor, signed by all 3 soldiers she'd saved. They wrote that you didn't just save their lives. You taught them that a true pilot never leaves anyone behind, even when the odds are impossible. Lynn's composure finally cracked. "But I did leave someone behind." "No, ma'am, you went back for him. The explosion wasn't your fault. You gave him every chance you could." Colonel Martinez, the man she'd saved, stepped forward. "She flew through enemy fire twice, once to get us out, and once to try to save Private Chen. The depot explosion was caused by enemy artillery, not pilot error." He handed her a small medal. Not the Medal of Honor she'd refused, but something else. A unit citation signed by every pilot who'd served under her command. "We never forgot what you taught us. That flying isn't about the machine. It's about the heart of the person controlling it." Lynn looked around at the faces watching her. Some of the pilots she'd trained were now training others. Her techniques, her instincts, her hard-earned wisdom, it had all been passed down. "I failed one mission," she said quietly. "You succeeded in 100 others," the colonel replied. "And the techniques you taught us? We've used them to save dozens of lives since then." A maintenance sergeant approached. "Ma'am, every modification you've suggested for the Apache systems, they've all been implemented fleet-wide. You've been saving lives from the ground for 6 years." Lynn realized something profound. She'd thought her pilot career was over, but she'd never stopped being a pilot. She'd just found a different way to keep people safe. The colonel made an announcement. Effective immediately, Lieutenant Lynn is reinstated as senior flight instructor for advanced combat techniques. But Lynn surprised everyone. "I don't want to fly combat missions anymore, but I'll teach. I'll make sure the next generation knows what to do when everything goes wrong. And if they need you, if there's an emergency," she looked up at the Apache still circling overhead, "then I'll be ready." Comment, I owe someone if someone saved you and you never thanked them. Lynn declined reactivation to full flight status, but she accepted the position of advanced combat instructor for pilots who might face system failures. She taught them to fly by sound, to feel rotor vibrations through their feet, to navigate by spatial awareness when all electronics failed. No textbooks, no PowerPoint presentations, just a whiteboard and paper maps. One morning, someone found a small wooden plaque she'd placed in the Apache hangar. When you have nothing left to guide you, let your skills lead the way. A hand-drawn portrait of Lynn with the motto, "Red Talon never lost a wing," appeared on the hangar wall. She didn't attend the graduation ceremony. Instead, she left a hand-drawn schematic for improved rotor systems in the coordination office with a note, "I don't want to fly anymore, but I want the pilots who come after me to never have to spiral through wind vortexes alone." 6 months later, 3 of her students saved a downed helicopter crew using the manual navigation techniques she'd taught them. When reporters asked about their training, they all said the same thing. "Our instructor taught us that when technology fails, instinct takes over, and instinct is earned through experience." A year later, the Apache training facility was renamed the Red Talon Advanced Flight Center. But the most important legacy wasn't on any plaque. It was in the dozens of pilots who learned that true skill isn't about perfect conditions. It's about what you do when everything goes wrong, and that sometimes the most important flight you'll ever make is the one that brings everyone else home safely. Today, Apache pilots still tell stories about the instructor who could diagnose mechanical problems by listening to engine sounds, who could predict system failures days before they happened, who could teach perfect emergency landings while standing on the ground. Not because she wanted recognition, but because she understood something crucial. A true pilot's job isn't to fly. It's to make sure everyone gets home. Be like Lynn. Use your experience to lift others up. And when they ask how you know so much, you just smile and say you learned from the best teacher of all. Survival. Comment, "I'll live better" if you believe heroes come in all forms. Some people retreat, not because they failed, but because they choose quiet service. Lynn didn't need titles. She just wanted those Apaches to fly safer than before. Maybe you've met someone like her. Quiet, humble, but who once saved an entire unit. Today's story reminds us that not every hero needs recognition through medals. Some call signs only need to be whispered in the wind, and sometimes one hand raised in the middle of a circle of guns is enough to make every weapon stand down. Remember to be grateful and live with purpose, because you never know who's keeping you safe in silence. The most dangerous person in the room might be the one everyone ignores, until the moment comes when their experience is the only thing standing between you and disaster. Honor the quiet ones. Learn from them. And when your moment comes to help someone else, do it without asking for credit, because true legends don't need their names in lights. They just need to know that everyone made it home. Comment, "She spoke through action," if this story will stay with you.